Life Audio.
Hello, and welcome to the Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic podcast. I am your host, John Seidel. This is your home for real stories, radical vulnerability, and remarkable comebacks. In the end, this podcast is a place for the desperate, the downtrodden, the destitute, and especially the drunk. But it's also a place of hope and healing. I know that firsthand because I'm the Christian who became an alcoholic, not the other way around. Today, I've found sobriety after decades of struggling. But more importantly than finding sobriety, I found Jesus. My prayer is that as I interview people just like you and just like me, along with professionals in the fields of trauma, faith, and addiction recovery, you will find the peace that is available to you through Christ on the other side of whatever you're going through and whatever addiction that might be. Because let's face it, we're all addicted to something. So welcome. Let's get radically vulnerable as we explore what it looks like to be on this journey of messy sanctification. We'll be right back after this. Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic. I'm your host, John Seidel, as hopefully you know by now, but if this is your first time tuning in, welcome. So excited to have you. We, as I said in the intro, talk about the process of messy sanctification and what that looks like, especially related to addictions. And I really am so glad that you are here. I expressed my gratitude last week, and I really do think that God is doing something. And you know, I'm the type of guy that tries not to get my hopes up. Like if we're going on vacation, I pack like at the last minute, and I think part of that is because if I pack early, then I like have a lot of time to think about like not being on vacation, right? And I get like too excited, and I don't like that. So, which is funny though, because I'm always early to everything. So, whatever, we just roll with it. But I'm honored to have you here. I think you guys are really on the ground floor of something that God is doing, and hopefully the conversation that God is starting about addiction and about misordered and disordered drinking, eating, whatever it is, whatever that thing is. And I'm excited to have you. So thanks for being here. I say that you can go to christianalcoholic.com, where, by the way, you can order and pre-order the book. Still 40% off and still free shipping through the publisher. That will end once the book comes out. So if you go to christianalcoholic.com, you click on that button and you can still get it up until the time of publication. Take advantage of that. It actually behooves me to like send you to Amazon because the numbers, Amazon is greater. But I don't care about the numbers. I want you to get the best deal possible. So, but also when you go to christianalcoholic.com, I tell you that you can fill out a form. And if you want to be on the show, you can send me your story. Bill is someone who did that. Bill reached out to me, shared with me his story, and he is now on the podcast. And Bill is our guest today. His name is Bill Seymour, and he's a creative guy. And I think his story is an interesting one because in some levels, it's not the fairy tale ending, right? Like you think that, hey, I'm going to repent, I'm going to confess, I'm going to come clean, and maybe I'm at enmity, if you will, with my wife, and then my wife it's going to be great. And Bill ended up getting a divorce. His daughter ended up wanting nothing to do with him. And while he was able to repair the relationship with his daughter, which you will hear, and you'll hear how he did that, the one with his wife wasn't repairable. And so this is, I think, a true and honest story of what it can look like. And yet there's still hope. And I'm going to share with you at the end of the episode a little update on Bill, even since we recorded this, that I think will drive that point home. But we have a great conversation, and so Bill is your kind of middle-aged suburban dad who drank himself out of a marriage and crawled back to Jesus. Was raised in the church, knew the right things, knew all everything, and life ended up not looking exactly like how he thought it was going to be. And I think that's a lot of your stories. So enjoy this episode with Bill Seymour. Bill, thank you so much for joining the Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic podcast. I'm really excited to have you on today.
Yeah, thanks a lot, John. I'm
so happy to be here and really look forward to this. So thanks for having me.
And I think you're a great example. And I will tell people this, I don't necessarily do I'm not trying to hide my contact information. And so, it's very easy to find if you want to email me or send me a message. And I love that you are one of those people that just sent me a message. And while I can't promise that I respond to everything, I do pretty much promise that I read everything. Once in a while, something slips through the cracks. But I was really excited to get your message that said, hey, me too, right? Like I've struggled with misordered drinking just like you. And so I think you're a good example of people, please send me messages because this was just, a quote unquote stranger. And here we are and you're joining the podcast. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm glad you responded the way you did. And I'm just so glad that we got connected and we have a lot of similarities in our stories. And I really think God just brought us together. So
yes, absolutely. We're in kind of the same quote unquote line of work. I joke that, I have a consulting and creative agency that pays for my writing habit. And because the only people that really like make a ton of money off of books and a living off of it are like, James Patterson and, Clive Cussler, may he rest in peace. And, Oprah. And I'm not any of those. So we'll talk a little bit towards the end where people can find you. But really, one of the great aspects that I love about this podcast is just people sharing their stories. And so we talk to people who are, more of on the clinical side of it, whether it's Dr. Allison Cook or Dr. Lee Warren or people who can explain the brain science of what's going on. But I really just love to have people who are like, hey, this is my story. This is how I ended up where I was, and this is how I crawled out by the grace of God. And you are one of those stories. And so we chatted on the phone a few weeks ago, and I just loved your story. And I was like, you got to come on the podcast. And so I want to open the floor where you can introduce and talk about your story. What is it about your story that you said, I have to reach out and tell it to me? And now what I want you to tell the audience. So tell us how you became a dysfunctional alcoholic.
Yeah. For starters, I've been sober for a little over 8 years now. And recently, a couple months ago, I was asked by a friend to write a blog post for a large behavioral health company that owns facilities everywhere. And they run like a recovery blog. And she just reached out to me and said, can you write something? Would you like to write something about your recovery and things that you've learned? And it was the first time in 8 years that I've ever really like publicly shared my story. And after that, I just, I think God started working on me and saying, you need to do more of this. You need to do more. So,
this is going to happen right throughout because I just love the free-flowing aspect of it because I think there's probably people listening who maybe they've started to get that kind of prompting. And let me ask you, before we even get into the whole story, was it scary? What has been your experience in starting to share your story?
Writing it has been such a release. And it's been a little emotional too, because you're bringing up a lot of bad memories, that maybe you had forgotten about, and here it is again. But you feel like, okay, I need to write about this because someone else has probably experienced this or is going through it right now. And so it's an emotional process for me because it's cathartic coming out. I feel kind of led to do this. So I feel like I'm serving in some sort of way as I'm writing it. And that's motivational for me. And then it's scary at the same time, because every time I go to hit that publish button, it's just like, oh man, is this good? Is this right? Is it going to help anyone? Or am I going to get blowback, whatever. Should I go this far with it? And so that's sort of the process of writing for me and how it feels to share my story. But I truly feel, as a person in the creative business, that there is such power in story. And the best stories really come from a real place of vulnerability. So I've just had to be comfortable with that.
Well, as someone who has a chapter in my upcoming book called Radical Vulnerability, yes. And so thank you for modeling that. And so here we go. Walk me through, how do you you're 8 years sober now. Where did you come from?
Well, you know, unlike a lot of alcoholics and addicts have just horrendous pasts, a lot of trauma. And, I don't have a whole lot of that really. So it's a little different because my parents are fantastic, and I had a great childhood. They were involved in every aspect of my life. They're just good Christian people who serve the Lord. We were in church Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday prayer meeting, fellowship, supper. I was in the youth choir, Bible drill, you name it,
Yep.
all of it. So it wasn't for a lack of a good upbringing. I remember, I don't know, I was probably in my early teens when my mother sat me down and said, I want to talk to you about alcoholism because it runs in our family. And they didn't drink a drop, my parents, or at least I never saw them drink a drop. Maybe they did every now and then with friends, but never saw it. And so she was concerned about that and just wanted to have that discussion with me. And I just blew it off. I'm like, okay, yeah. Oh, I didn't know that. I'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess I was probably 16 years old and was with some friends and had my first drink of alcohol. And my body just said, yes, more of this.
Yep.
Like, I'll never forget that feeling. And so it didn't come from, a lot of past trauma, at least initially, or a bad upbringing. It was just that my body just loved it and wanted more of it. So,
which I think is important to point out of that. Like, I think all of our stories are different, right? Okay, I did have past trauma and that contributed, but people are different, right? But I also had that similar experience to you, right? Where I got drunk the first time probably around 12 or 13, 14, somewhere in that,
mm-hmm.
early teens. And I remember my body saying, yep, this is a great escape, right? I was going through a lot. Now, the irony, at least for my story, is I don't think I ever got drunk again until I was probably 21. Right. So even my story, right, is like, okay, I knew it. My body reacted to it. The idea of this is how I can escape was started there, then and there. But yet I had severe anxiety. Right. So I was always catastrophizing. Right. And so the catastrophizing, took over and kept me from getting drunk until I was 21,
mm-hmm.
but my body still remembered, right?
Yeah, it was saving it up.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that happens to you, young age.
Mm-hmm. And I'll say another thing. I mean, I had a need for attention and being the center of attention and kind of life of the party. And when I was drunk, that's what I was. I was good time Charlie. I was funny, boisterous, and looking back, probably just a pretty, annoying clown to most people. But, it also gave me that feeling of being the center of attention because I could kind of entertain, when I was drunk. So I really started like binge drinking in high school. And, just going to parties on the weekend, trying to find somebody that could get it for you, just all those things. And then I go to college and, just joined a fraternity and, that just, escalated, I guess. Although it didn't keep me from functioning at all. I was a good student in college. But on the weekend, it was party time, and then Sunday it was sleeping it off all day. So, I was a heavy binge drinker really since I was a teenager, since I first started. And then, once I graduated and I got married, I married my high school sweetheart. We had dated since high school and all through college, known each other since we were 13 years old, you know. We got married and we kind of made the decision not to have kids for the first few years so that we could just kind of have our time. So, we like to go out and have fun and do things. And that just gave me the opportunity to, continue to drink heavily on the weekends. It wasn't becoming like a daily thing because during the week I was trying my best to be responsible. I had a pretty good job with the newspaper here in Nashville. And so, I was still functioning pretty well. At that time, we also started, attending a church here in Brentwood, actually, and became involved in a young married couple's Sunday school class. And we just really started becoming closer to God during that period when we were active in our church and surrounded with other believers that were in the same stage of life as we were, studying the Bible, sharing with each other our struggles, stresses, challenges, and how Jesus taught us to, respond to those things. And so that was a season of life when I really wasn't drinking too heavily. Still was drinking, but was kind of keeping it, somewhat under control. But I really do believe it had a lot to do with our involvement in that church and in that Sunday school class, which was so great. Then we started, having kids. We had our first child in 1999, and we have him in the nursery at church, and we're still very involved in all this. And then in 2002, we had our daughter. And again, during that time, I was keeping it together pretty well. And I think a lot of, sort of like you had that period of, 8 or 9 years where you didn't, drink. And then, you kind of cut loose when you turned 21. I was kind of going through this period of control.
What did control look like in that period?
It looked like being able to stop at a certain point, it was not drinking all throughout the week, or if I did, it might be a beer when I would get home from work or something, but not 10,
right.
Right. So it was just a little more under control in that sense because I felt like, responsibility as a father for sure. And as a husband to not, lose my job because I couldn't get up in the morning or something like that. And then also because of I think the relationship that we had started to build with God, since, you kind of get away from that when you go through college and, you're on your own and you're wanting to do all the things. And then we sort of returned to, the church. And so I just think that period, those things helped me keep it a little more under control. I mean, there were still times when I would go, we'd go to a, football game, or, we went to the University of Kentucky and we would go back to Lexington to see all our friends, and it was party time weekend. There was still that going on.
You guys have a pretty decent basketball team there too, so I'm sure that created opportunities or excuses, I should say.
It did. I tell you, if you know anything about horse racing, the track in Lexington is called Keeneland, and it's kind of legendary. It's this beautiful ivy covered wall, blue blood, old money kind of place. But college students, we'd put on our little Oxfords and ties, and we would go there and still. And so in October, you have football season going on, and you have the fall meet going on at Keeneland. So that was a day that looked like getting to Keeneland at about 10 o'clock in the morning, setting up your tailgating spread, and people get fancy with this, and just starting with Bloody Marys. And so by the time you even get in to the track, you're already pretty buzzed. And, this was just the process. This is just what happened with not just myself, but, all of us would do it. And then you're in there betting on the horses, drinking, Woodford Reserve and Diet Coke, not to, do a commercial for a bourbon.
Right. You are in Kentucky.
Yeah. And then after that, you somehow roll out of Keeneland over to the football stadium and tailgate over there for the ball game, and then sneak your bourbon into the football game. I mean, that is a marathon day.
Yeah.
So, we had days like that, weekends like that, even, after we were married and had kids, just cutting loose with college buddies. So,
yeah. So but in this period that you're at, I mean, I'm sure we all have if you've experienced a period of control, I mean, I have. I went from out of control to out of, like I kind of did this yo-yo at times and convinced myself, well, look, you're fine, right? Like, yeah, okay, this was a bad period, but look, you've got it under control now, Yep. But so you're in kind of this period of control, and then what happens?
Well, we moved to Franklin, which is just a little bedroom town south of Nashville, just kind of a part of the Nashville metro area, and built a house there in a new neighborhood. And we were one of the first houses built on our street. And then as more houses started being built around the cul-de-sac, it was people exactly like us moving in and building houses. Young couples, couple of kids, that were like 2 and 5 years old. So, eventually we've got a pretty good social scene going on down there in the cul-de-sac. And, something that I've since noticed and sort of realized in, just reflection and prayer and thinking back on those times is how slowly incremental it is to go from, I'm pretty good under control to just full-blown alcoholic behavior, Yeah. It doesn't happen overnight. Maybe for some people it does, if there's a huge crisis and they just got to go down a bottle. But for me, it was just very little incremental concessions. I heard someone say that phrase, just incremental concessions that we make where we are sort of moving our previous boundary.
Yes.
I'm not going to drink I never drank on Sundays. It just didn't feel right. And now we've got this kind of, fun time atmosphere with all the other families in the cul-de-sac, and it's all us, dads. We've got a fantasy football league, and so Sunday we'd go down there and someone would roll their TV out in the driveway and we'd sit out there and watch football and drink beer. Yeah. I'm like, well, I guess it's okay, and so now I'm drinking on Sundays. And then we would have parties down there in the cul-de-sac. And we actually called it a cafe. We're having a cafe tonight. So everyone would bring their lawn chairs down there. We grill. The kids are playing in the cul-de-sac, playing street hockey, whatever. And then the dads, once the kids, it was like, okay, ladies, go put the kids to bed. The men are going to sit out here and drink beer for the rest of the night, which that's awful. And so I just allowed myself to start doing that. And then next thing you know, I'm down there, drinking a 12-pack till 2:00 in the morning and missing my daughter's, my 5-year-old daughter's little soccer game the next morning because I couldn't get up at, 8:00 or something like that. That didn't happen overnight. That happened over a course of years and just small little, like I said, incremental concessions.
I love that, right? Because I think that's my story as well. Like you said, this is not going to be everyone's story, right? Some people are going to go through a crisis and it's, something, and that's fine. But that's my story as well, right? And talk about how it, for me, the way I explained it was like, there was always this Rubicon, right? Like I'm never going to cross the Rubicon. Like I'm never going to do this. And then before you know it, this massive Rubicon that I'm never going to cross is just a little trickle stream in the rearview mirror. And there's a series of those, and there's always, for me, there was always another Rubicon. Well, okay, I did this, but at least I won't do, or at least I'm not doing X until I did, right?
Yeah.
And for me, you know, it's like one of my chapters is called a slow fade. And it's like, yeah, it's like I didn't set out one day to be like, I'm going to drink through all my problems, right? But this
Mhm.
happened, and then this happened, and then you're home alone because work is not, you don't have work. And so it's like, well, it's 10 o'clock. I'm off. I need some me time. Well, I might as well have a little bourbon while I'm watching a movie or a show, or, yeah. And it's just all these things. Right. And
Mhm.
I think to your point it is a series of concessions. It is a slow fade. You know, I think for the most part, the person who cheats on their spouse doesn't wake up one morning and say, today's the day I'm going to cheat on my spouse, right? Like, yes,
Right.
you know, like that decision, although it may be made that day, is made in the hundreds of decisions, the small compromises, the little things you do for weeks, months, years that then lead up to that decision.
Absolutely. And you know what else? I think you mentioned this before in our last conversation, and I love this, but you can always find someone who's worse than you and
Yes.
say, well, at least I'm not that bad. So I'm still okay.
Yeah, right.
Uh,
I think what we were talking is like,
so true.
and I've said this before on here, but like, there's only one alcoholic that is the worst alcoholic in the world. By definition, the worst is one person, right? And it's like, you know,
Not me.
maybe it's not me, right?
Yeah.
Because there's things that I'm not doing. So it's like, if you live by that, well, at least I'm not the worst. Yeah, there's only one person that's the worst, and all the rest of us are just like degrees separated from it. And guess what? Our lives are still falling apart.
Yeah. I was still doing that even when I was sober, and I'm sure we'll talk about this some, was in some AA meetings, in those first couple of months that I went to, and where I would look around the room and still do the same thing. I'm like measuring people up, like that guy went to jail, that person, had 5 DUIs, whatever, and so I'm still going, wow, I at least thank God I wasn't as bad as those people. So it still kind of continues to a
Right.
certain point, but then you eventually come to realize that your problem was a problem. Doesn't matter, um, you know, if you were as bad as this person or not. It still was a problem. It was negatively impacting your life. You were facing consequences, and you couldn't control it.
We'll be right back after this. So how does it grow from the cul-de-sac, beers till 2 a.m., missing daughter's soccer game? Where does it go from there?
Well, that starts to eventually impact your marriage. Starts to, excuse me, impact your work. And work at that time, I had just co-founded an ad agency in Nashville, and we had turned it into a pretty successful business. And, I was in my mid 30s, and I was making a lot of money for, someone that was, 36 years old. And you get this sort of feeling of invincibility, and there's an ego trip, and you're like, look what I have done. I'm better than everyone else. I deserve, to drink it up and go party and, buy this, spend this money. I was just like a drunken sailor, almost literally. And
Yeah.
so, that's sort of that's kind of the next piece on the timeline. But my drinking was starting to escalate with, just making it okay in my mind, like I was talking about those little incremental pushes that you make. And that starts to impact your marriage. And then eventually it starts to impact your work. I was starting to, just show up late for work. We had employees, and here's one of the co-owners, coming in whenever he wants to, it looks bad. And so I think as problems started to arise in the marriage, that's when I really started drinking to, not for sport, but for, medication,
Yeah.
and just to, hide pain, anger, and just not have to sit with those emotions that come with a marriage that's starting to struggle and conflict that's happening there.
What was your wife starting to notice a change in kind of, I mean, obviously, like, I think that's an interesting way to put it. Drink for sport versus drinking for coping, I guess is maybe how to say it, or drink for medication. Did your wife notice that shift?
I think she noticed just the escalation and the acceleration of it, and that the hangovers, the oversleeping, uh, those sort of things. Where
Which
I don't know.
by the way, I tell people, and this is kind of, about comparison, is like, I never once missed work. I never once slept in because I was hungover. Never once. Right. And so I told myself, look at how good I am. Right.
Yeah,
Oh, again, and
yeah,
I know I'm not trying to beat this to death, but this comes up so much on this podcast, right? Because
yeah.
the comparison game is what we do, right? So
Right,
I hear
yeah.
your story, and I think, 2 years ago I would have been like, well, thank God, like the Pharisee, thank God I'm not like that other man. Like, I don't miss work,
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
sleep in. I've never once, and yet, right? And so that starts becoming the norm for you.
Yeah, big time. I'm still, even if I'm coming in late to work, my partner's not saying anything about it. And so it's like, hey, I guess this is okay. I'm still producing, award-winning work for clients and all that. And we're billing all this money and making money. I'm still doing fine.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's another one of those things. It's like, this is okay.
Yeah.
I really don't need to be there at 8:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
I stay till 6:30 anyhow, so I make up that time. It's just
Right.
those sort of things.
And so when do the cracks kind of start showing?
Man, it wasn't probably after being in the business for a few years, maybe 5-ish years, and into my late 30s. The kids' activities have really picked up. They are now playing travel sports at a very competitive level. So it's not traveling over, 45 minutes to Murfreesboro. It's going to Chicago. It's going to Las Vegas. It's going to Dallas, for tournaments and whatnot. So now we're not in church at all. That's gone. Kids aren't in church. And so I'm just drifting away. And in this business, I was becoming dissatisfied too, because I think my partner and I just were going in different directions, and I wasn't getting like the creative freedom and attention. Again, attention's a big thing that I craved. And so I was just kind of shutting down at work and drinking more. So I would say that the cracks started showing when we were, not in church anymore, didn't have the kids in church anymore. We're traveling all over the country with parents that like to party.
Yeah.
That's a big thing in travel sports. Ask anybody, any suburban mom and dad that has kids in travel sports. The party is in the lobby, after you put the kids to bed. So there was that. And then also sort of my falling out with the business. And again, my wife kind of shut down on me, and I'm someone who likes to talk. I want to work things out and I want to talk about problems. She was not. So I would want to, like, why are you mad? What's the deal? And she would just not want to talk. And that would make me angry, because now anger was a thing with me because things weren't going my way. And, I either was irritable because I wanted alcohol and couldn't have it at the time, or I was still hungover from the previous day. So, that's when I kind of started checking out and was just like, I'm just going to get drunk every night, So those things really started to, cause the spiral. And then it really culminated, not culminated just yet, because there's still more after this. When my wife filed for divorce, my ex-wife
Mm,
filed for divorce. That was, if you can imagine, um, you've known each other since you were 13 years old. You've dated since you were 16 years old.
mm.
Then you got married. You've never even dated anyone else in your life. I mean, she was all I knew.
Yeah.
And so I know there was a lot of dependency that I had there upon her for my own happiness, which I can't imagine the weight that would put on somebody, when they just want a partnership. Um, and then, as I start, not treating her so well, being angry all the time, hiding it, or just, drinking it all away. When she knew I had a problem, but she was afraid to bring it up. Like, we never talked about it.
Yep.
Um,
Same with
and
my
then,
wife. I mean, she knew, but she was afraid to bring it up. Right.
yeah. Hey, can I ask you a question?
Please,
What,
please.
so how would you have reacted if she brought it up to you?
Yeah, and it's a good question because I will say let me modify my statement a little bit. There were ways and times she would poke at it, and when I say poke at it, I don't mean like in a nagging way, right?
Yeah.
Or like a trying to get me angry. But
Right.
there were ways she would kind of bring it up, and I think what she learned pretty early on is, I would get defensive, and
Exactly.
so or I would turn it around, or I would gaslight, right? And those weren't even full on conversations of like, I think you have a drinking problem, right? Those were like,
Yeah.
hey, have you thought about cutting back a little bit, or I've just happened to notice that you've drank every day this week, like
Yep.
what are your thoughts on that? So I think and the defensiveness and all the gaslighting and all that stuff happened. So I think I trained her in for lack of a better term to not bring it up, right?
Yeah.
Um
That's,
so I think if she would have brought it up in a full on way, like it would have been World War III.
yeah. Same exact thing. There was one time, and this was even before we had kids, or maybe we just, had our son at the time, where she brought it up. She was like, "Hey, notice you're kind of, sort of drinking every day." And, I shut it down
Yeah.
immediately. So that was a good way of stating it, that I sort of trained her not to bring it up again,
Yeah. Right.
because she didn't like conflict. And at that point, I think she was like, all right. So anyhow,
So
you probably want me to, yeah, go ahead.
no, I appreciate that question. So I think there's Dr. Alison Cook, who we've had on the podcast. She talks about in one of her books, I Shouldn't Feel This Way, just how, when we feel threatened, we very easily can lash out, right? And so I
Right.
think that's my thing. It sounds like it was your thing. So your wife, though, she files for divorce.
Yeah. Worst night of my life.
Mm,
She actually, came home early from a conference that she was attending out of town for her job, and, sat me down on the couch and told me. I knew that we were heading that way if I didn't make some changes, and I had that year made some changes. I knew I had some, mental illness issues, thought maybe I was bipolar, something was wrong, I went and got that taken care of, you know? Um, and then I stopped drinking, or say this, I went dry, and I didn't have anything for a couple months, even leading up to this point. And then when that happened, she sat me down and, told me that she had filed for divorce. I mean, I lost it. It was,
mm,
to me, it felt like the worst thing that could happen in the world. Um, I just, broke down in tears, yelling. It was awful. I reacted so poorly to that. I reacted like a child to it.
yeah,
Um,
that is so
I guess I
fascinating
was
to
a
me,
child.
though. Right? Not the
Mhm.
acting like a child part, but the fascinating part of like, um, because I think we do this, right? Or we can do this, is sometimes we're willing to sacrifice other things that aren't our precious, you know? Like we're like Gollum, right? Like the
Yeah.
drinking is our precious. And
Yeah.
and I will say this to people listening, that can look like sacrificing it in the near term so that you can go back to it in the long term, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's my story, right? I did that, right? So on the mental health thing, right? Now I knew I had mental health issues like you, so I went
Mm-hmm.
and I got those taken care of, or I should say not taken care of in the sense like they just went away, but it's like
Yeah.
I started doing battle against those. I started doing medication. I started going to therapy, like, and yet in the back of my mind, there's like, maybe that means and it's not always this conscious, but it's like, maybe that means I can still keep drinking then. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like,
Yeah.
at least I don't have to give up drinking,
Yeah.
right?
It's one less thing.
Right. Or
That
like,
anxiety and depression thing, that's one less thing.
yes,
You can drink
yes.
now.
Or it's like, yeah, I'll give up drinking for a month, or I'll give up drinking for a week, or I'll give up drinking for a couple months, right? As long as I don't have to commit to giving it up forever, right? Like
Exactly.
we can all commit to something for whatever length of time if we know, but I'll be able to come back to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you had, interestingly enough, you're like, okay, I went to get the mental health issues, sorted out. I gave up drinking for a little bit. And yet what it sounds like is, but there's still like, because you're still in a sense holding on to some of those things, like the full on change that needed to happen didn't happen. And your wife is like, I'm still filing for divorce.
Yeah. Yeah. My intention was to, get and stay sober on my own. I thought I could
Okay.
do it on my own. I was still sort of in denial. And that night, she left to go spend the night with one of her friends who was a neighbor, just because the whole thing was so emotional. And she was just like, I can't stay here tonight. And what did I do? I went straight to the liquor store and bought a fifth of fine Kentucky bourbon and drank most of it that night. And that was the first time that I had really drank anything in like 3 months. Because at that point, well, now I've got nothing that I'm fighting for. So I might as well, I don't have to be sober anymore. I wasn't even thinking about my kids. It was all her and what I was losing there. I mean, because I probably in a weird sense, almost kind of worshiped her, I mean, I don't think I've ever said those words out loud. That's crazy. That sounds crazy for me to say, but it might be a little bit true. So yeah. And then this happens. This is fun when you get divorced. I wake up at 6:00 in the morning to someone ringing the doorbell, like incessantly. And I don't know anything about divorce. I don't know this part. So I'm like, what is going on? So I get up, drag myself to the door, and there's a dude standing there holding an envelope, and he says, William Seymour? I said, yeah. He goes, you've been served. And literally smiles and walks off. And like, I wanted to just run after him and tackle him. And,
Yeah.
it was like so awful. And that just made it real. That was humiliating. And which is something I've since learned that God needs to humble us and test us with trials like this, because what I had never done was fully surrendered to him. And so I was just in the enemy's grasp. I was just a toy for Satan at this point. He could do anything he wanted with me practically.
And I love, you talk about surrender, and I think that's, I don't want this to go unnoticed, which is, and I want to be careful how I say this, right? Because I want to be sensitive, but I think it's an important point that you brought up, that in those 3 months before your divorce that you quit, but, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, that quitting for your wife is that's a noble reason, right? And yet it let you down,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
Like you can quit for the right reasons, but I believe strongly, and you and I talked about this a little bit in our phone call, is like, but ultimately, I don't think you can quit for other people because they'll let you down, right? So you quit
Exactly.
for your wife divorces you, and what do? You, like, the first thing you do is go to the liquor store,
Yeah.
right? And so it's
Yeah.
like, there are some, it can be let me put it this way. I think it can be a noble and good initial motivation, right? And so I
Mhm.
don't want to poo-poo. Like, listen, if you're listening to this and you're getting drunk and you're missing your kids' soccer games and your wife is like, where are, like, yes, I think it can be a good and noble initial motivation to say, all right, you know what? I love my family. I want my family to stay around. I'm gonna, make some drastic changes. I'm gonna get sober for them.
Mhm.
But, and I think this is where maybe your story is heading, is but in the end, it's got to be for a greater reason.
Mm.
Like you talked about surrender. So you had to learn to completely surrender your life to Jesus, right? And you're a Christian, right? I
Yep.
get that. So this is where I think it's interesting. Is like, I was a Christian, right? But yet I think in that sanctification process, we learn, oh, there's like this kind of initial surrender, like, I give my life to you, Lord, and then it's like, take up your cross and follow me and die daily. Oh,
Yeah.
this is what that looks like,
You
right?
can see the fine print there.
Yeah, right. So I think I just don't want that to go unnoticed, especially for people listening to this. Like, yes, okay, you can quit for your wife, you can quit for your kids, but that can't be the sole reason. That can be a
No.
motivation, but it cannot be the sole reason. So talk a little bit then about the surrender. So you get served, and where does this bring you mentally, emotionally, spiritually?
Yeah. At my lowest of lows. And, this is something that very few people know about until I wrote about it like last week on Substack. Still, that's very few people. But
Hey, I'm promoting it as much as I can.
yeah, I appreciate that, man. It was great. Um, but yeah, I literally had a mental breakdown. I thought I was sitting at home that day, um, by myself, just drowning in this, despair and pain. And I was having a panic attack. I didn't know what that was. I thought I was having a heart attack because I'm breathing heavy. Or I feel like I can't catch my breath. I'm almost hyperventilating. My heart's pounding, and it feels like adrenaline just shooting through your body, just like these electrical jolts, like and so I took myself to the ER because I thought I was in trouble. I didn't realize this was just like a mental breakdown that I was having. And they put me on an IV and start shooting me full of whatever to calm me down. And the doctors have to ask you questions. And one question that they're going to ask you is, have you had suicidal thoughts? And I answered it honestly. I was like, well, yeah, I thought about driving my car off the road, but immediately put that away because I would never do that for my kids. Well, just because I said, yeah, for a fleeting moment,
Uh-huh.
he's like, I have to commit you like right
Mm.
now. And fortunately, I had a friend. He was one of the dads on our soccer team, on my daughter's soccer team, who was an ER physician at that hospital, and he was there that day. And I guess he saw my name up on the board. He came in and he's like, "Buddy, are you okay? What's happening?" And I told him. And then he went and talked to that other doctor and talked him out of actually like committing me. And they just said, "But you have to promise you're going to go." I said, "Yeah, I'll go." And so I spent the weekend, it's Memorial Day weekend, never forget it. I spent it in 2010, spent it in the, psychiatric hospital. And it was just, it was so awful. Um, it was just a breakdown that just wouldn't stop. It just continued. I like just cried constantly in there. I was having these thoughts that were driving me crazy of her being with other men because we had never been with anyone else before. And we were all we had ever known. And so, that was something that was driving me crazy. Um, but so that was like the next thing that happened. And once the divorce was final, and I moved out, and I bought this house in the same neighborhood, so that it would be, in my, thinking it would be easy for the kids to just go back and forth. Um, they were like 13 and 11 probably at the time. And let's see, they, because of the way I was, they eventually stopped staying over here, even though, you
Because the
have
drinking had continued.
gotten worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I was oversleeping and not getting them up for school, things like that. They'd have to get themselves up, or I would, get up late and they've got like 5 minutes to get out the door.
Yeah.
And so now, kids that age, they want to be able to depend on their parent. They want consistency out of their parent, out of their father, their mother. And I was not giving them that at all. And so they just stopped staying over here, even though we were supposed to have every other week. And you know what? I'm ashamed to admit this. I was okay with it.
Yeah.
Because it let me drink.
Yep.
And I didn't have to get them up in the morning. And at this point in time, like right after the divorce, I forgot this part. I basically got forced out of my business partnership. So now I was freelance, which meant I'm working from home, but not really doing much work. I had this nice chunk of change from my buyout. So I was just kind of doing whatever I wanted. Now I'm living in this house alone, me and a Labrador. And that was it. So I had nobody that I was responsible for, nobody that I was accountable to. And now I am a completely non-functioning alcoholic, staying up till 3:00 in the morning, drinking bourbon, like almost a fifth a night. You know, you can always point to people that are worse than you. There may be, people that are like, oh, that's nothing. But
Sure.
that was plenty. That was enough for me to not function. And now my life
Right.
had, as the big book says, I was powerless to alcohol and my life had become unmanageable.
Yep. And I think it's interesting, you talk about the stain, one of the reasons that I am talking so much during this episode with you is because, like you said, our stories are so similar, right?
Yeah.
It's like, yes, that's what happened. Is that, I lost work, lost my biggest client. No, not necessarily because of the drinking, right? Like they went through a reorg, their CEO and then parted ways, and they had to kind of start from scratch, right? Well, I'm a contractor, so I'm gone. But you have all this time on your hands. And yet I think the irony is that a lot of people, in light of COVID, right? I think a lot of people found themselves over the last 4 or 5 years in a similar situation, not the same situation, but in a similar one, just where you're at home and you have more time on your hands. And I think that's why we've seen an uptick in, all the statistics and studies say we've seen such an uptick in, what we'll colloquially call alcoholism, but alcohol use disorder, right? And so I go through explaining the difference between in my book, but an uptick in alcoholism since COVID, because like you and me, people who didn't even have to lose their jobs are sitting at home, way more time on their hands, and they don't have the responsibilities to drive to work or to drive home from work that they once did, right? And I think that's a lot of people's story in some ways.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's such a good point. Yeah,
and
that
so that's
whole lockdown, work from home period probably, helped a lot of people go from heavy drinkers to, full on problems, alcoholism,
exactly,
addiction, whatever. Yeah, that's sad.
So that's where you're at. You're sitting there. You are really. This is kind of the low point.
It is. This is my life now, and I was in counseling. My my daughter was in counseling because she was the one that was really affected the most by this. I don't know if that's fair to say, but she was the one that was struggling the most with it. She was angry. She was under serious attack, and real oppression spiritually,
Uh,
um, where, she was having bad thoughts. And so eventually, the counselor, we both saw the same counselor, and this is a Christian counselor, and she was fantastic. Um, she would always ask me, why can't you just surrender to God? Why can't you just change? And she didn't know about my drinking. I think my ex-wife had told her that, was a problem with Bill. Um, and she would ask me, do you think it's a problem? I'm like, no, it's all good. And then she'd be like, why don't you just surrender it to God? The Bill plan's not working. It's time for the God plan. And I would always just be like, yeah, no, I know I need to do it. Like anything else.
yeah,
Yeah, I need to fix that, but not today.
yeah. Like
Uh,
it's an annoying part of like the dryer. Well, it still works,
yeah,
but yeah,
the
I gotta
dripping
fix it.
faucet,
Yeah, right.
a spiritual life.
Yeah.
Um, so, anyhow, even though I was barely functioning alcoholic, if at all, I was still very involved in my daughter's life. She was a very highly recruited D1 recruit as a soccer goalkeeper. And, she was made a verbal offer from an SEC team when she was a freshman in high school.
Huh.
She was training, invited to train at the U.S. National Olympic Team Training Center in the summer. I mean, she was going places. I was totally involved in that. I was her marketing director. I mean, I was sending, video highlights to coaches. I built her a website, the coaches, you have to market your child. So heavily involved in her life and in her, well, put it this way, in her soccer career. I don't know if I was doing that more for me or for her. Sad to say, but getting back to the story with the counselor, one day, this was my bottom. Okay. This was it. The counselor called me and said, Haley needs to take a break from you. And, she said, she needs to take a break from you. And I'm like, what does that mean? She said, well, she just needs to disconnect from you. And I'm like, what? I can't have any contact with her? And she said, no, she doesn't want to see you. You can't call her. You can't text her. I'm like, what about her soccer games? Kind of still travel with the team and just at least stand on the sideline over in the corner or something. And she's like, no, nothing. I was like, well, how long? And she said, well, it could be a week. It could be a year. It could be forever.
Wow.
And so at that point, that was the lowest of lows. Even, after the divorce, I'm, a couple weeks later, probably, if that, maybe longer than that, actually, was in a session with the counselor, same counselor. And I was just like out of it. And
What was the reason, by the way?
Just because she knew I was an alcoholic.
Your daughter did.
My daughter did. I was letting her down in other areas of her life. Like, when she was playing for her high school team as a freshman and they were training in the summer, I would oversleep. I mean, I was sleeping until like noon. She would have training and I was supposed to go pick her up at like 11 o'clock in the morning, and I oversleep. And she's texting me, calling me over and over and over. And finally I wake up and I go get her, and she's standing there with the coach, a half an hour after practice ended. The parking lot's empty. She's so embarrassed and angry. Yeah. Just things like that where I was letting her down. And it was just, I think it was anger and disappointment on her part. And one thing that came up was she just couldn't understand why her dad couldn't be like all the other dads. Get up, all these other dads get up and, put on their nice clothes and go to work every morning. My dad doesn't do that. My dad, just those sort of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm sitting in the counselor's office, and finally she asked me this question. She says, "What is holding you back from just turning it over to God?" And the words just flew out of my mouth like someone else said them. I said, "It's the drinking." And I was terrified that I actually said that. I've never admitted to it before in my life. And like, what's going to happen now? What have I done? you
Mm,
know? And she said, "Are you ready to quit? Like right now?" And I said, "Yes." And she called one of her other clients who was in AA and said, "Can you take Bill to a meeting tonight?" And so that's when I got started. I went home that night after that meeting and filled up. It was either 4 or 5 like big garbage bags full of liquor, wine, beer, mugs, corkscrews, anything that was like paraphernalia
yeah.
to actual product, and threw it out. Um, so that's what led me to my bottom. Now, I'm happy to report today that we eventually restored our relationship, and we're just closer than we've ever been. Her soccer
Hmm.
career was ended from concussions.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so that was a dream of hers that was taken away from her. Uh, she became a heavy drinker, and praise God, she came to me about it, or basically was open enough about it to say, you know, I, I think I have a problem. And she witnessed, her life was watching what it did to me. And praise God, she hasn't had anything in like over a year, I think, now. So she's the one that drives all her friends around.
We'll be right back after this. I've been talking, there's a book by an author named Gina Berkemeyer, who's also a guest for this podcast, and talks about generational trauma, right? And generational issues, and how, like, when the Bible talks about generational curses, I think a very fair reading of that is not necessarily God that's like, I'm going to punish, right? I'm going to be this angry God that does it. It's really talking about these issues and sins that we pass on to our kids, right? And so on one hand, like the generational problem is like, your daughter on one hand did see you deal with your issues through drinking, right? Not surprising that when her dream goes away, but yet in the redeemed version, the way that God works is then she comes to you and says, okay, like maybe it's kind of baked into my subconscious to deal with losing my dream with drinking, but now God comes in and says, no, but now look at him. He brought this to me, and you can actually now deal with these issues in a healthy way, and you don't have to succumb, and you don't have to turn to drinking. Like, I just think it's so cool to look at your story and see both things present, right? That in this, in one way, yeah, that's how she dealt with it. And then in the redeemed way, she comes and brings it to you and says, Dad, I don't want to do this. I saw how you stood up to this, how you broke the curse, how you broke the cycle in your own life. Yeah. And I want to do that too.
Yeah. It's miraculous. It really is. And it's such a blessing. And, I hope that it's something that sticks for her, but I think she knows that she has someone that she can always talk to or hold her accountable. But yeah, I'm just so proud of her, and it's just a way that God works through you once you do surrender and start to get your life back together. Because that, I'm not tooting my horn here or anything, but my kids, as they're growing, over these 8 years, they're now 25 and 22. They're seeing me transform. They're watching God at work in me. They're watching, me make amends with people. They're watching me stay sober. They're watching me, get back to work and, start being a responsible human being again, and being there for them and being present and all those things. And so, if you're doing it right, that's what you're doing. And they see this. And it's been just so remarkable how they've responded to that. And it's like I used to say, I've taught my kids, you know, I've modeled what not to do. So that's taught them what not to do. And they're not doing those things. So, I guess I was a pretty good father because I showed them all the things not to do. Right. Uh, but now they're seeing, this new person, someone who was given grace and redemption and a second chance, um, and is working hard at it. And, so now they're seeing how to live. Like I'm actually modeling that now.
Yeah.
And I couldn't
Praise
do that
praise God, man.
without the surrender. Just
So
wouldn't.
let's talk about that a little bit. You go to your first AA meeting. What did surrender look like? How did you've been sober for 8 years, so we went through a lot of the details of where you were, but now like how did you find sobriety? What did that look like? You've hinted at using AA, so what has that been like?
Okay, so yeah, I did. I went to AA, and you know, everyone's path. We talked about this. Everyone's path to sobriety is different, and AA's worked for countless millions and millions of people. Other people have just white knuckled it and done it on their own. Other people have leaned on God's strength to do it. And for me, AA was helpful in the early stages where I needed support and everything. And then, I just, there were a couple things that, I found kind of weren't for me
Mm,
in that setting. And so I just kind of stopped going. But at the same time, I just fully surrendered and was really, relying more on building my relationship and letting God take control,
yeah,
giving up that control and putting all that faith and trust in him, you know, um, that that was actually working for me
yeah,
enough and
yeah,
and better, I think.
yeah,
So that's, there's going to be a lot of, people that, I mean, I know people that have been sober for 30 years and still go to meetings because that's their, you know, that's the way they serve, and that's fantastic.
yeah,
So there's nothing wrong with AA. That's just not the way that I did it. But I will say after that first meeting that night, man, those guys made me feel so welcomed and supported. And, I went home that night. This is what surrender looks like. This is what you actually asked me here. I went home that night and I got down on the floor on my knees and just prayed. I'd never done
mm,
that before.
mm,
I just close my eyes and pray. I got down on my knees and prayed to God, you know, I surrender everything to you. I can't do this without you.
yeah,
Um, my will is, not the way anymore. And I only want your will to be done. And I put all my faith in you that you will, that you will help me stay sober and that you have a plan for
yeah.
me.
So let me just say, I thank you for sharing that. I talk about in my upcoming book why I didn't do AA, and so I think there's a lot of wiggle room there. Some people don't like that I didn't do it. Some people,
Mhm.
I read the big book, and I took a lot of great stuff from the big book. But I go into more depth and detail about why I didn't do AA in the book. But I appreciate what you said, and I think knowing that there are multiple pathways to
Uh-huh.
recovery, and multiple ways to recover. And for some people that's AA. For some people it's kind of this hybrid model like you talked about. Like it was great in the beginning, and
Yeah.
and for some people like me, I just didn't do it, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay, because I actually encounter more people who are put off about seeking sobriety because they think they have to do it this one way. And
Yeah.
my message to them is you don't, right? Like
Yep.
use whatever tools God has given us, and I think one of those is AA. Great.
Mhm.
Use whatever tools you can, but the most important thing, and I think this is what you just kind of alluded to, is you have to surrender, right? Does that,
That's part of it. That's part of the steps.
right,
Too.
right?
I
And
mean,
does that mean, I've had people say, so are you saying that people can't find sobriety, without Jesus? And what I would say is, you can find sobriety without Jesus. I just don't. I think there's a better form of sobriety out there with Jesus.
yeah.
I just, like, as a Christian, like,
Yeah.
that has to be my mantra, right? It is better to be sober with Jesus than it is to be sober without Jesus. And I'm like unashamed about that. I don't think that's controversial as a Christian to believe that, right?
Absolutely.
Like, that's great. So
I agree with that 100%.
So to your point of like shoot for Jesus, and this is what I tell people: I shot for Jesus and I got sobriety. Right? If I shoot for sobriety, I have a real good chance of losing it. And I think that's kind of what I was getting at early on. You shot for sobriety for your wife, and you lost it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
In the end, you shot for Jesus and surrendered into Jesus, and now look, 8 years in.
Wow, that's a great way of looking at it. That's amazing. Yeah. Here's kind of a funny story on that. I play a little ice hockey. I'm not very good at it, but I enjoy doing it. Currently sidelined with some back issues, but a guy that I played with, he's actually Jewish, and he's big in AA, sober for 25 years, I think. And when we first met after a game, everyone sits out in the lobby and guys drink beer, and I wasn't drinking beer. He wasn't drinking beer. And he looked over at me. He's like, "Hey, I noticed you're not drinking beer." I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Are you sober?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." And he goes, Did you go to meetings?" And I said, "I went to a few." And he goes, You're not still going to meetings?" I said, "No." He goes, "Did you find Jesus?" I said, "I did." And he goes, "Those are the only two ways you can do it, AA or Jesus." He's coming from a Jew, which is great, find Jesus.
That's great. Oh,
Immediate follow-up question.
So let me end with this question. I have someone who, a friend of mine that I'm walking through sobriety with right now. While we're recording this right now, she's 6 weeks in, and I love her so much. She's such a great friend, and she's so honest, and it's one of the things that I really love about her. And she was texting me this morning, actually. And she's like, you know what I hate about all this is I hate that, no one really talks about how lonely and hard it is in the first whatever. And, everyone's like, great job. Like, you're doing great. I love it. And she's like, I keep telling them, like, I mean, you don't understand how hard this is for me. Right. Yeah. And so, my question to you is, what encouragement do you give to people who are thinking about it? And by the way, I don't say that to scare people off. But I'm also like, I'm just gonna be honest. Like I talk about a book, like how the first, few weeks and months of sobriety, like I was pacing the living room because I didn't know what to do with myself. Right. Because I'd gotten so used to a routine of, I start drinking in the afternoons or evenings, and that becomes my thing, right?
Yep.
I literally did not know what to do with myself. My question then is, what kind of advice or encouragement do you offer to those people who are thinking about sobriety and are fearful of what that's going to be like in those early days, or the people who are in those early days and are experiencing some of those? I mean, maybe it's even, the symptoms of withdrawal. What would you say to them?
I would say that the life on the other side is so much better and so much more. It's so beautiful that it's worth the shakes, the night sweats, the insomnia, the pacing, the fear, all those things don't compare. The kind of the short term pain and fear that you go through doesn't last forever. You get through it. you push through it, especially, I mean, you have to surrender. You really have to surrender and, know that you're not God and there is one, and he's going to get you through to the other side, and he has plans for you. Like, you were created for a purpose, and it wasn't to sit around drinking all day and getting drunk. What you're doing is you are wasting your gifts that God gave you that he wants you to use to help other people and serve him, right? You're wasting that. And that's something that I've come to realize through this process that,
Yeah.
when you're doing that when you surrender, then you start this beautiful journey of God just sort of revealing things to you in all different kinds of ways. um, when I was really feeling nudged by God to start writing about this and being more public with my story, I was literally seeing like memes, on Facebook, and they're like kind of those encouragement sort of things that would say, you climb that mountain, you have a story, now you need to share it with people. I mean, I was seeing stuff like that. It's crazy, but
Yeah.
I'm telling you, God has a way of on the other side leading you through his will down the path. And there is a plan that he has for you. There's a purpose that he created you for. And what a waste it would be, not just for him, but for you to miss out on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Two,
if you're
I
thinking
love
about it,
that.
just surrender. Yeah.
And two things I'll
Just
say
give it
about
up.
that. The first thing I would say is, I think there's maybe some people listening to this who are like, well, maybe they're you when you were in your mid 30s and they're like, I'm successful.
Yeah, I'm
I'm
good.
killing it. Right. I'm,
Mhm.
I'm, I'm, you know, I'm not, wasting. Right. And what I would say to them is, well, think about Bill's story. Right. First of
Yeah.
all, there was a bomb that was going to drop. Right.
Yep.
And second of all, what I tell people is, but imagine what you could be doing if you didn't have one hand tied behind your back.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
that's what when especially you get to the drinking point that you and I did, you're operating with, one hand tied behind your back. And so what I would say is, sure, maybe you're successful now, but what could you be doing? Or sure, you're successful now, but just wait, because the pound of flesh, the alcohol wants its pound of flesh and it'll come
Yes.
for it in a big way,
Yes.
And the second thing I was going to say, I forgot. And that's not because I was drinking. That's just because, every once in a while that happens. So thank you, Bill. That was so encouraging. Thank you for your vulnerability, your honesty, for telling your story, for being faithful to share what the Lord has done in your life, for telling us where you've been so that we can appreciate where you are. If people want to read your writing, they want to see your work, where can you send them to get more about Bill Seymour and what you're up to?
Yeah. So I just started writing on Substack just a few weeks ago, and my Substack is called Wilderness Tested. And the concept there obviously is that, when we're in God's wilderness, he's using that time to test us. And I feel like my story is one of, being humbled, being tested in the wilderness, and then turning to God to help him get me out of the wilderness. So that's what I write about. And it's just getting started. I think I've written, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 posts yet, but you can just search Wilderness Tested in publications on Substack and you'll find me there. The intention is to use that to begin telling other people's stories too. People who are willing, like me, to come out and talk and be vulnerable and share their story of how they came through the wilderness.
Yeah.
And that's the concept, and with the goal of creating better men. It doesn't have to be about addiction. It can be about all different kinds of wilderness journeys. So that's the concept there, and that's where you can find me.
Well, and I remember the second thing I was going to say, and it still applies here. And what I want to say is, and Bill talked about the message to people who are in early recovery, and what he's talking about the wilderness here is, I think for a long time in my life, I treated the things that you just said, the talk about being in the wilderness, there's another side, God's got you, as probably just like trite platitudes. And it wasn't until I literally had nothing else to hang on to that I realized how comforting that actually was. And so maybe you're listening to this and going through the wilderness and God's got you. And that might sound like trite platitudes. I want to let you know that it's not. And on one hand, my prayer is that you don't have to come to understand that. And then the other hand, my prayer is that you do. And that there is some wilderness that you have to go through to realize that, like, how much that actually means and how real that is. Bill, thanks for sharing your story. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me on.
All right. So update on Bill. It takes a little bit for me to edit these episodes. And so there's some time that elapses between when I initially record them and then when I get them out to you. And so I'm happy to announce that since we recorded this episode, Bill found a lovely woman, and Bill is now married and kind of moving on with his redemption story. And so congratulations to Bill and his new wife. And, I hope that's inspiring to you, right? Is that the Lord still continues to work for our good and his glory. And so, Bill's life doesn't look exactly like he thought it was going to look like. And yet, you know what? He's still trucking, and I'm really proud of him. He's also gone through some surgeries, and he's been through a lot. And so I'm honored that he chose us to share his story. If that story resonates with you, let me know. Again, if you have a similar story or a different story and you want to share it, go to christianalcoholic.com, fill out the form, and let's chat. I really do appreciate you all. Thank you to our partner, as always, Life Audio, for making this podcast a reality. Go to lifeaudio.com and listen to some other great podcasts. Until next week, we'll see you later.